It's time to actually start sewing on fabric. Yay! This is going to be a very quick step because you've learned so many things already and it's going to be a piece of cake. So don't stress out about it. The very first thing you need to know is just you need to have a scrap of fabric. If you don't have fabric lying around already, a good thing to try is just to go to the store and get a fat quarter of fabric and cut some pieces off. You want to have 2 pieces together so that you can actually sew a seam and just line up the edges together on one side. At the end of the last video, I showed you how to bring the bobbin thread up to the top. I'm just going to show you that again to remind you that you do want to have both threads up at the top, both the needle thread and the bobbin thread up at the top when you start to sew. I'm using 2 different colors of thread here for this demonstration just to make it easier for you to see what's going on. So again, you're going to hold your needle thread and you're going to turn the hand wheel over to the right towards you. Remember, you always turn the hand wheel towards you and just down, put the needle down and up once, and then you can just pull and you can see that needle thread coming up, and there it is. You can grab it, and remember, you want to keep your foot off the pedal so there's no chance you're going to get yourself with the needle whenever your fingers are near the needle. And then you're going to take both threads and put them down and back behind. And that's the way you want to have it before you start sewing. All right, to start the first seam, just put your fabric in somewhere towards the start of where your seam is going to be. For this first one, we're not going to worry about securing the beginning and the end of the seam, but do try to line up your seam allowance here on one of these lines that you're going to use, and then put your presser foot down. Remember, presser foot down. And the new thing that you're going to need to know is to hold these thread ends for the first few stitches. Holding these thread ends will keep a lot of the thread nests that sometimes plague people when they're starting to learn to sew. Holding them will just keep that from happening at the beginning of seams. You only need to hold them for just the first couple stitches, then you don't need to. You can bring your hands down here. And remember, just gently guide. Down to the end. Now again, you want to make sure your needle is up. Then you always want to make sure to put your presser foot up. And then you should be able to pull your work out like this easily. You do want to pull this way or this way. You don't want to pull to the front because you want your thread ends, remember, to be back and behind again. One thing I will say, it's good to get in the habit of clipping your thread ends close at the end of every seam, just because it makes it a lot easier to keep a neat project. That's something that I didn't do as a kid, and I always had very messy projects. And then you can go around and clip the beginning as well, and you won't have a bunch of threads in your project. I do want to have you experiment with one thing so you can see the difference on the tension in the needle thread when the presser foot is up and down. If you pull on the thread right now, you can pull fairly easily, but if you put this presser foot down, you'll be able to feel the tension. I can't pull this anymore because the presser foot is down. When the presser foot is up, I am able to pull it. So the next step is to look at your seam and see how it is. Does it look good on the front and on the back? Mine does. If you have problems on the front or the back that look like this, the very first step to do is to check your threading again. Just go back and check the whole threading. You might want to just take the thread out and just do it again, follow your manual and make sure. If you continue to have problems, the seam doesn't look nice and neat like this one, go down in the notes below this video and check out the troubleshooting steps. I have a whole nother section about troubleshooting the stitches. So that was very easy, right? Very, very easy because you knew all those things to do beforehand. You know all the motions already. There's just a few things that I wanted to point out to have you practice. There are things that you've already practiced, but you're going to practice them with thread now. So we're going to practice just securing the seam at the beginning and the end of each seam. There are some machines that have a little button on the machine that you can push that will have the machine do a series of little short stitches to secure the machine. If you have one of those, you can use that to secure your seam at the beginning and the end. If you don't, what I would recommend is to, as we practiced on the paper, going backwards a little bit at the beginning of the seam, go backwards and then forwards over the seam, and then at the end, go to the edge and then backwards again. So we'll practice that. So remember, I'm going to sew at a certain seam allowance here. I'm starting a little bit this way on the seam, and I'm going to hold my thread for a little bit. I'm going to have to use this hand here because my backup is over here. I'm just going to back up a few stitches, and then I can go forward all the way down. Then I can sew to the very end, and then back up a few stitches. And again, lift the presser foot and then pull it out. Remember, you have to lift that presser foot so you'll be able to pull out your work. If you try to pull it out without lifting the presser foot, remember the tension will be really strong and you're going to pull on your needle and you're going to bend your needle. So the first seam I did over here, again, we didn't do that back stitching. So I can pull that out some, right? But over here, I did the back stitching. I can't pull that out. It's secured. The other thing to practice is to practice at different seam allowances. You can sew a whole bunch of different lines on this with different seam allowances. And the last thing I would suggest doing, because I'm sure you'll need to do something securing your projects with pins and then sewing, is to practice sewing with pins. So I'm just putting some pins in this piece of fabric and we're going to sew a seam using the pins. The important thing about sewing with pins is generally you do not want to sew over pins. And the reason that we don't usually sew over pins is it's because the needle can hit the pin and either be deflected and hit something underneath that shouldn't be. So the needle might hit the pin and then go forward and then hit the hook or something underneath, or it could break the pin and send parts of the pin underneath and damage the machine, or even break the needle and then again send things down into the machine. Now, generally that only happens if you're going very, very fast. So if you want to sew very slowly over pins, you can. But you can also just take the pins out as you go along. So you've practiced stopping and starting. So what I do is I come up to the pin, I stop, I take it out. Come up to the pin, stop, take it out. If you're doing something with a lot of detail and you really need to make sure that things don't move, you can try stopping with your needle down, take the pin out, and then you'll know that nothing is going to move as you're dragging that pin out. Again, you can try that as well. Put that needle down, take the pin out, and sew along. And again, remember, always lift that presser foot up before you take out your work. You're ready now to do your first project. I have some suggestions down in the notes below this video. There are also plenty more lessons in this course. Please make sure that you watch at least the basic maintenance lessons so that you know how to keep your machine running smoothly. There are some basic things you need to know about keeping it clean and free of lint, and some machines do need to be oiled as well. Those are the sorts of things that you need to do to make sure that it runs smoothly and continues to keep stitching nicely. Many machines are thrown out because of poor threading and also because they just needed to be cleaned or oiled. So if you keep your machine well cleaned and maintained, it will last many, many years. Remember, this machine that I have, I got in the late 1980s, and it still is serving me very well. Go have fun sewing.